Since Shibuya, I've learned my lesson about having trying to get my stocks in some of these characters rather before it's placed of their they've got longevity essentially, because I really liked the villains. I liked all the special grades, and unfortunately in Shibuya they all got squished. And then I had Naoya, and I was like, well, Naoya's pretty cool. I wonder what Naoya's like gonna do in long term. Naoya ended up getting squished. So we got this dude, the guy from the last chapter that looks kind of like Satoru Gojo. I don't know if it's a guy or girl. Either way, interesting. But I really like this guy so far. This new dude in the Culling game. I wasn't sure in the last chapter when we saw him if he was the comedian guy that was like shown near the very start. But this is a new character, Hiromi Higuruma, and his character is pretty neat. My bigger questions for him in his existence in the story is going to be what side he's on, because he, to me at least, seems like a character who's going to be going with whatever he thinks is like justice, and whatever he thinks is the right path. It's like he could easily be a wild card character that could switch sides at any point. Like if he sees justice and everything in Kujaku, then he's going to be going after him. But if he ends up seeing like Yuji and Ko's side, or even another party entirely, so he's like, oh well, they're the ones that are fighting for the right thing, or anything around those lines, where he can just see from their perspective why they're right, or why exactly their whole setup is the way to go, then he could easily switch. Like he's a wild card character. I like that a lot already. But his backstory of how he would always try and go for people he thought were innocent, or like anything that he believed were iffy enough that could potentially be innocent. And he explains it in the chapter that like in the depiction of justice, like she wears a blindfold, so it's like justice is impartial. It doesn't really matter what side you're on, if you're inherently a good guy or if you're more of a bad guy. Whatever the truth is should be where things are going. You could have a guy who's generally like a scumbag, but they might be being falsely accused of some crimes, whereas you could have a really good person who, for whatever reason, is actually guilty of said crimes. And because of that, you have a dude who just ultimately is trying to do the right thing, even like despite emotional ties, again, of takes that you have on people. Because like the guy that he's primarily helping was just kind of caught up in a set of really unfortunate circumstances that made it so people thought he was guilty of like a double murder. But when he proves that the guy isn't guilty in the first case that they had, first trial, they ended up appealing it, and then they're like bringing up that in Japan the kind of what is the exact term I'm trying to remember, the criminal trials end with a 99% guilty verdict. So usually when they find out who it is, and when they take him to trial, they're almost always going to be guilty. So he had a very unlikely scenario of helping this guy from the start, but he was able to prove a bunch of stuff, like, okay, during the time of your of the alleged murder, there's video evidence showing that you were at the supermarket, or was it the convenience store, getting something. So like the guy has a lot of just general alibis. He's got a clean record, and on top of that, they have video proof of like it couldn't have been him if like the murders took place at this time. And there was another guy that just disappeared, conveniently at this point. And I feel like those two things by themselves are more than enough. Like you have, like, unless it was like some elaborate extra step where like these two were working together for whatever reason, it wouldn't make sense to blame this guy. But at the end of it, he's saying how they had always just branded him guilty from the start. It was one of those things where they're like, okay, well, almost everybody that ends up going to trial ends up being guilty, so we're just going to assume he's guilty despite whatever, despite whatever evidence and whatnot comes for us. And I actually like what Akutami did here, because generally when when people have stuff like this, it's done more in a way that it makes the character like, oh, it's a bad guy that gets off because of like the corrupt system, instead of an occurrence of an innocent person getting set up in a bad scenario because of the the opposing force of the criminal justice systems of these setups, where it's actually somebody who's completely innocent getting screwed over because of the way that the courts can be. And he's not about that. I don't think it has entirely to do with just like the want to get the justice done, because like there's a part where he's saying like, why do they always look at him like that, and there was like a previous guy who he thought he was going to be able to help, but it's just like he understands that these people are, you know, they take their rage out on him because they're in a bad spot in life, and he's like their potential save at that point. And if like what you were promised by this guy isn't delivered, obviously you're gonna have a person that you're gonna direct all that rage towards. And I think that's just a factor in it. I think is both his want for justice, but also his own personal standing in these scenarios is both like is a factor as well. Because they even bring up like, well, how do those people like having these reactions to you and saying these things to you affect your mental health? And clearly it didn't hold out, because I absolutely do not think at the end of the chapter it's just like, no, we're gonna have a retrial, like justice is getting served. I think it's that very clear that mentally he is not in the best of state, especially like the look on his face. He looks like he's about to snap. But at the end of the chapter, when he's mad that they were going to brand this guy who's innocent as guilty, he ends up smashing his own gavel like down, and has this cursed technique creature behind him, this big weird cloaked creature with like 2 scales on it, with its eyes sewn shut, very spooky looking, and he's demanding a retrial. And this is a guy that's in the Culling game. The thing about him being in the Culling game that's more important, I think, just to really mention, is at the end of the last chapter, that guy who, you know, looks a lot like Satoru Gojo, like that guy has 2 points less than Hiromi Higuruma. So this guy has a higher body count. And he's Tokyo Team 1. So this guy must be a bigger deal than the dude who's looking for Sukuna. So maybe this is probably the guy that Akutami is bringing into this arc as like a personal favorite. I'm just guessing this is going to be the hype guy. This is like the big potential like boss character that is going to come out of opponents from the Culling game. So I'm definitely there for that. I really like this guy so far. I liked Nalia a lot. Like, even though Nalia was a scumbag, I liked him from a bad guy perspective. And unfortunately, he ended up getting squished by Maki very early on, before the Culling game even started. Whereas this guy is clearly going to be fresh going into the Culling game. And I really want to see what this guy can do. This guy looks really interesting. His power looks like it's going to be really broken. I'm actually kind of hoping something for kind of like Damnatio has over in Black Clover. Like some form of balance thing, but don't do it in some form of other OP manner. Not just like, oh yeah, I'm balancing your power. I wanted to see this dude do some crazy stuff. Considering the difference between him and like Damnatio is like a important character for like the large scale lore. But he wasn't like, hey, I'm going to be a big character going into the next arc. Like, he potentially he could have, but he wasn't. Whereas, like, clearly this dude is, and he's going to be a big shot opponent at some point for somebody. So, I got high hopes for him. Only in terms of, like, where he's going to be potentially sitting as, like, a character in the arc. I don't want to get too invested in him, because Akutami likes to kill characters off pretty willy-nilly. And that's one of the hard parts about series where they'll kill characters off without a lot of requirements to be in play, like a lot of build-up and a lot of weight that has to go into it. Like, they can just kill characters off, like, no problem. And, like, that has its own merits. Like, obviously it builds, like, it builds a tension that certain characters could go at any point. But at the same time, it makes it hard to get invested in characters. So, I want to get into this guy's, character stocks, but I don't want to have it like Nalia, where I build it up and then he gets killed off really fast and then I'm sad. But anyway, other than that, though, comment below, thumbs up the video for the like button, subscribe button, check out my other videos. It's been that. I appreciate everyone who's already subscribed, and thank you all for listening. Bye.